Right, there is a lot to unpack here, so bear with me. This might be a little bit of a long video. Hamas, the Palestinian Islamic movement, has unceremoniously attacked Israeli citizens in a deadly, the most bloodiest attack in years happening in the country, which has led to many hundreds of deaths in the process. I'm going to read you the latest articles that are out there today. I'm also going to give my own thoughts on the subject and also the reaction of our congressmen and women, which is basically obvious at this point. I don't even think you need to romanticize what they're saying. You already know. So why don't we get right to it? This is an article by Yahoo News. Hamas surprise attack out of Gaza stuns Israel and leaves hundreds dead in fighting and retaliation. And I was given attention by this by a friend of mine. She usually updates me with news. I did not know what was going on. I slept in late today and basically woke up to see this. And we're going to be here for days and weeks. Backed by a barrage of rockets, dozens of Hamas militants broke out of the blockaded Gaza Strip and into nearby Israeli towns, killing dozens and abducting others in an unprecedented surprise early morning attack during a major Jewish holiday Saturday. A stunned Israel said it is now at war with Hamas and launched airstrikes in Gaza, vowing to inflict an unprecedented price. In an assault of startling breadth, Hamas gunmen rolled into as many as 22 locations outside the Gaza Strip, including towns and other communities as far as 15 miles from the Gaza border. In some places, they roamed for hours, gunning down civilians and soldiers as Israelis military scrambled to muster a response. Gun battles continued well after nightfall, and militants held hostages in standoffs in two towns. Israel's National Rescue Service said at least 200 people were killed and over 1,100 wounded, making it the deadliest attack in Israel in decades. At least 198 people in the Gaza Strip have been killed and at least 1,610 wounded in Israeli strikes, the Palestinian Health Ministry said. Hamas fires took an unknown number of civilians and soldiers captive into Gaza, a deeply sensitive issue for Israel. So I'll go on to Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera says medical sources in Gaza say at least 232 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli air attacks launched after a Hamas offensive against Israel that killed at least 200. The group running the besieged enclave said its surprise large-scale operation was in response to the desecration of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and increased settler violence. I don't need to read you from Fox or CNN. You know, this is what's happening right now. Now, this comes at the end of Sukkot, which is a holiday that the Israelis celebrate for a week in commemoration of the Feast of Tabernacles. Has another meaning too. I forgot there's another meaning to it as well, but it comes right at the end of the holiday. And the Israeli domestic intelligence service, the Shin Bet, caught off guard. Now, this is surprising. Now, from this point on, just going to give you my own thoughts. I'm also going to reference articles, so this way this doesn't become one giant opinionated video, because, you know, who cares about that? What I want to hit you is the facts and history of, you know, what's going on here. And it isn't black and white. Now, according to our politics online, oh, this is a black and white issue. If you're watching CNN and Fox currently, you're going to get one side of the story. You're not going to get everything. And I wish history was as simple as the news made it out to be, which is all for a reference I give the 9/11 truthers, fringe conspiracy theorists who make up these crazy scenarios and, you know, theories in explanation of the 9/11 attacks. I sometimes wish, you know, 9/11 was as simple as they made it out to be. I wouldn't be reading, you know, this stuff 16 years later. So what precipitated these attacks? Was it just that Hamas just basically hates Israel? Yeah, that's a reason. You know, the Hamas hates Israel. They're a ghoulish military, religious, Salafi-oriented group. I mean, I am for the elimination of Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, as well as the same as I'm for the elimination of Al-Qaeda and Abu Sayyaf and Boko Haram in North Africa and the Islamic State. You know, I know that there are going to be people that say, well, you're anti-Islamic or anti-Sunni, but, that doesn't work because I'm not racist and I'm not politically imbued and make unnecessary and irrational statements based on my politics or religion. I'm atheist and I don't vote, and I'm not a racist because I think it's irrelevant, actually. What matters is culture, not the color of your skin, right? That's irrelevant. But needless to say, not to go off track, that, Israelis going to look at this video and say, well, if you don't defend Israel, you're an anti-Semite. And, it's not going to work with me either. I spend most of my time criticizing the Gulf, Salafis, rather than I do Israelis. Although I am somebody who's anti-Zionist, anti-nationalist. I think that ideology is just as damaging as the ultra-Orthodox Salafi sect, Wahhabism. In other words, let's say, for example, the Haredi settlers, right? They're no different than the Islamic State. What they want is what the Islamic State wants. They want an Israeli-governed country because they believe God gave them that right. Right. Well, you're no different than, people like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who claimed himself the caliph of the Islamic State before he was killed, and basically said that Damascus was going to be, which is the capital of Syria, was going to be the staging point for the worldwide Islamic Caliphate. See how it went that well, right? Nevertheless, what led to these attacks? What precipitated it, right? Well, I see all the Israeli nationalists and all the evangelical Christians coming right out, just like, clockwork. As soon as I read the stories, as soon as I read the articles, I went right to the comment section of Twitter, and boy, they didn't disappoint, and I'll share that with you. And all outrage, crocodile tears, right? Some people have a right to grieve because there are residents that were killed in Israel. I mean, so far I've seen a couple of videos where you had Israeli, citizens in the ground, dead, killed, butchered. Some of them were beheaded. And just like, wow, and Hamas, doesn't care about the Palestinians. They don't care about, hegemony and peace. They want to destroy Israel and they want to destroy, Israeli citizens. So I share no compassion with Hamas, but I share a lot of compassion with the Palestinians. And boy, are they going to get it, because they're the ones who are going to suffer. Not so much Hamas, right? Israel needs Hamas to exist in order to justify their action, their overt military reaction, their violence against Palestinians. Because without it, the world would be outraged. And now the world is outraged for Israel because of what's going on. But you weren't outraged when the Israeli settlers were attacking Al-Aqsa Mosque. You weren't outraged when they were burning and killing children in the southern half of Gaza. You didn't care when they started bulldozing Palestinian homes, because according to you, nationalists, I'm talking to you, ultra-right, right? Because now it's your turn to get it. The left got theirs when it comes to Ukraine. Now it's your turn. And you're going to get it from me. You're the ones who ignored the cries of Palestinians. You're the ones who ignored the war crimes that the international theater was, warning you about, telling you what's going to happen. And that's not my thoughts. I'm going to show you the damn articles and reports that show this. The same reports you say is all anti-Semitic, it's all part of the new leftist world order. You're full of shit, all of you, right? October 5th, this is 2 days before the attacks. Hundreds of illegal Israeli settlers stormed Al-Aqsa complex on the 5th day of Sukkot holiday. Give me a break. There was no news outrage when it came to this. I mean, this is coming from the Middle East Monitor. It's a shame that I had to go outside the United States to find out what's going on, because my politics, my news coverage is so inherently blindsided by their loyalty to the Israeli government and the Israeli political system, because to go against them is self-suicide. We see that in Congress. That's why we have so many whores in Congress. That's not a declaration of the women in Congress. That's a declaration of both the men and women in Congress who sold themselves out for a lobby like the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. And the only reason why you're doing it is because the largest voting bloc inside the United States are coming from Christian evangelicals. In other words, the South. Because that's the one thing that ties them together, is that they have this, this perverted religious ideology and political identity with Israel. They don't care about hegemony. They don't care about peace. They're warmongering, and they're not Christians. Let's put it that, Jesus was liberal. Okay. And I'm not talking about these leftists, these crazy green-haired leftists today. I'm talking about a classic liberal. Look up the definition of it. It's like classic conservatism, which is not what the evangelical represents in this country. This is some warped, fanatic Trump fan base is, ignorant, much like the Wahhabis, people that don't read. You're easily brainwashed because you identify with race and you identify with politics, you identify with religion, all the separatist ideologies that have warped your thinking away from humanity. Hundreds of illegal Israeli settlers on Thursday forced their way into a flashpoint at Al-Aqsa Mosque complex in occupied East Jerusalem on the 5th day of the Jewish holiday of Sukkot. For those who are outraged, and some of you, some of you genuinely who are outraged should be when it comes to these attacks in Israel happening at the end of Sukkot. You should be, because violence only begets violence, right? But how many of you were bringing this up? None of you, Moses. No, I can't say none. Very few who spoke out that, Israeli settler violence is on an unprecedented scale since the Netanyahu government took over in December of 2022. The most right-wing government in Israel's history. And that's saying something. In a statement, the department said at least 240 settlers entered the site under the protection of Israeli police. What do you expect Palestinians to do in this matter, right? This is not one instance. I'm just showing you one of dozens. I could pull up years full of stories, okay? This is not like an unprecedented, this is an unprovoked attack, as the media will say. This is a provoked attack. Was it right? No. I'm not defending what's happening in Israel today. I'm just showing you what led to these attacks. Because the media won't do it, your right-wing government won't do it, your left-wing government won't do it, because their loyalty to Israel supersedes American ideal rational thought or hegemony or peace. You thought Ukraine was the main story? No longer. They're going to be the case. This is it, because I'm going to also talk about the longer implications of this. And it's going to lead not to what gave the ideology to Hamas, what led to the rise of Hamas and that ideology. No. We're going to go right into the geopolitical venture of a war that has been long in the running, long in the making. And I think it's going to come very soon. Not this year, but probably by next year or the year or in 2025, 2024, 2020, one of those years. That's my prediction. Sukkot is a week-long holiday which started on September 29th and will continue until October 6th, ending a season of Jewish holidays that started by observing the Rosh Hashanah on September 15th. Settlers stormed the complex in groups through the Al-Mugrab Gate in the western wall of Al-Aqsa Mosque, witnesses told Anandu. At least 4,551 settlers have stormed the complex since Sunday, according to data from the Islamic Waqf Department. This wasn't a small group. This is a large contingent protected by the Israeli police. Here, attack Palestinians. Attack them at the most holiest site in Jerusalem. Al-Aqsa. This way we can precipitate the reaction for them so that we can overreact. Because that's exactly what this is all about. As Saul Alinsky once said, the action is in the reaction. And that's what Israel is all about. Right? The government, not the people. Know the difference, what I'm talking about. The government wants to provoke a reaction from its adversaries. In order to do that, sometimes civilians need to be sacrificed. And that's what this is all about. It's a sacrifice. Isn't that what they do on Sukkot? Right? Sacrifice in the name of remembrance. Not to get all Torah on you, but this has been going on for decades. Another article, Palestinian killed as Israeli settlers attack West Bank town of Huwara. The killing of 19-year-old Labib Dumadi comes amid a period of rising settler violence across the West Bank. Did CNN cover this? How about Newsmax? You're right. How about MSNBC? Of course not. Because it doesn't fit the narrative they want to imply on the American consciousness, which is support for war, support by the shape of a narrative they want you to believe. A Palestinian, this is October 6th, this is the day before. Palestinians have been killed when a group of Israeli settlers attacked the town of Huwara amid a surge in settler violence across the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Labib Dumadi, 19, was shot in the heart by an Israeli settler, the Palestinian Ministry of Health said on Friday. Relatives said he sought refuge on the roof of his home, which was under assault from settlers when the settlers shot him. The Israeli military had offered a different account, stating that a suspect was shot throwing a brick at a vehicle, but offered no details on the victim's identity. Of course not. More than 200 settlers gathered in the middle of the town of Huwara after midnight, shouting and dancing, some of them with covered faces. According to Palestinian resident Abdul Rahman Damidi told the news agency, the AFP. Right, that's just two articles in the last 2 days, because I didn't want to bore you with dozens of articles I could show happening last year and in 2021. But the rate of Israeli violence, settler violence, was growing under the Netanyahu government, because that's who the government basically has a tentative coexistence with. Even though the Israeli settlers hate Zionists, very complex country Israel is. There's a lot of ideologies at stake. But also, at the same time, they're Jews. So they're going to coexist because they have a common enemy, which is the Palestinian. Now, Hamas, for those who don't know, Hamas is a Palestinian Sunni Islamic fundamentalist militant and nationalist organization, which has its roots in Wahhabism, which is basically an ultra-Orthodox sect, a branch of Sunni Islam, which is not recognized as being Islamic at all. It also has a social service wing, which is called Dawah. Dawah basically is the act of inviting people to Islam, but it also has a military wing, and that is the Izzad-Din al-Qasim Brigades. And they're the group, basically, when I read you the article about capturing hostages, the Din al-Qasim Brigades, I saw videos of them, like, taking hostages of Israeli IDF soldiers. There was one Qasim Brigade commander, a Hamas fighter, dressed in black with the green headband. He gave an AK-47 to an older Israeli woman who was in a wheelchair. Hamas. Just, I don't know how this group wasn't destroyed easily. It is, especially in a, not to go off track here, but Hamas could easily be destroyed. They're located primarily in Gaza, West Bank, right? They are basically, condensed into these small areas. You could destroy these people. The IDF, the Shin Bet, using Unit 8200 to locate, using their technological advancements to track and monitor these people with cell phones, computers. They could do it. They could destroy these people. Destroy the hierarchy, you destroy the group. But they need this group to exist in order to justify their reaction, their police and military action in West Bank and Gaza. Because without it, the world will say, what the hell are you attacking them for? But as long as you attack Palestinians, they can always use the excuse that, well, they're housing Hamas operatives in this house. We need to destroy it. Oh, we need to shower rockets into the small area in the Gaza Strip because there's Hamas operatives there. Hamas was founded in 1987 after the first Intifada. And of course, there's always that story that was lingering around in 2011 about how Israel helped to create Hamas. And by the way, for those who are basically saying, well, that's a conspiracy, let me share an article by Ishan Thadur, Washington Post, how Israel helped to create Hamas, basically. All signs indicate that the government Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is prepared to wage a proactive battle in the Gaza Strip. Now, if you fast forward this article, which I'm going to link at the bottom of the description, you'll see that here, Israel's main enemy was the late Yasser Arafat's Fatah party, which formed the heart of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. By the way, Fatah was created by Abu Nidal, who created his own separate group outside the PLO because they said the PLO was being too liberal. So Abu Nidal, who has his hands in intelligence services all around the world, including Israel, by the way, basically created his own group, which basically was proactive, pro-reactionary. 1980 Vienna, Italy bomb airport killings, the massacres that happened there. God's sake, this guy was the first real international terrorist, right? Arab fundamentalist terrorist, but he wasn't religious. It's a secular ideologue. So this connection with the Fatah party, PLO couldn't shake it because that's who Abu Nidal separated from. Fatah was secular and cast in the mold of other revolutionary leftist guerrilla movements waging insurgency elsewhere in the world during the Cold War. The PLO carried out assassinations and kidnappings, and although recognized by neighboring Arab states, was considered a terrorist organization by Israel. Of course they were. PLO in the 1970s was gaining sympathy from countries like Germany and France and Italy only because of what the Israelis were doing to Palestinian neighborhoods in the Gaza Strip, and basically saw what happened after the Six-Day War, in which, was precipitated by Egypt and Syria and, to some accounts, Israel. But I'm not going to get into that here. But yeah, this is what's going on, is that the PLO was gaining favor. Then all of a sudden, Abu Nidal came along. And then the activities of Islamists affiliated with Egypt's banned Muslim Brotherhood were allowed to open in Gaza. That's strange. A radical departure from when the Strip was administered by the secular nationalist Egyptian government of Gamal Abdel Nasser, in which I covered extensively 5 years ago in my articles when I talked about the elimination of Arab nationalism and replacement with the Salafi-oriented groups. And it just so happened that the groups that funded these groups were Saudi Arabia, the Gulf, the United States, and the coalition partners, and in some respects, Israel, as we'll see here in this article. In 1966, Nasser had executed Sayyid Qutb, one of the Brotherhood's leading intellectuals. When I look back at the chain of events, I think we made a mistake, said one Israeli official who worked in Gaza in the 1980s, said in a 2009 interview with the Wall Street Journal's Andrew Higgins. But at the time, nobody thought about the possible results. Higgins' article is worth reading in full. He goes on to outline the type of assistance the Israelis initially gave Abdul Yassin, whom the PLO at one time deemed a collaborator, and Gaza's other Islamists. Quote, Israel's military-led administration in Gaza looked favorably on the paraplegic cleric who set up a wide network of schools, clinics, and libraries and kindergartens. Sheikh Yassin formed the Islamist group, the Mujama al-Islamiyya, which was officially recognized by Israel as a charity funded by the Gulf, Islamist, Wahhabi-oriented, because they wanted to fight against who? The PLO, the secular group that posed a rising threat to the international theater, because what they feared was that the coalition countries like Germany and European countries like Germany and the Sweden and Switzerland and Italy and France, Spain, all were noticing Israeli attacks on these in the Gaza Strip, unprovoked massacres, and it was bringing attention. So now they needed to ferment a radical organization that would basically be primarily supported by instigating. Now, Israel didn't create Hamas. This is what I'm saying. Hamas was already there. They were small, disorganized. It was a heartbeat. And then it seems that Israeli intelligence, led by the Israeli government, gave them more than that. And as you can see here, Israel also endorsed the establishment of the Islamic University of Gaza, which is now regarded as a hotbed of militancy. It's like they knew what they were doing, because this would create a reason to subjugate the Palestinians and take away more land, and gave favor in the international community as to why they're doing it in the first place. Yassin's Mujahma would become Hamas, which it can be argued was the Israel's Taliban, an Islamist group whose anti-sentiments have been laid down by the West in a battle against the leftist enemy. Well, the CIA does this. Just take a look at the CIA's history in South America in the 1970s and early 80s. Who were they funding? Well, they were funding right-wing separatist groups to destroy leftist organizations and leftist governments. Isn't that what we're seeing in Ukraine? Partially, anyway. So it's not like Hamas just came out of nowhere and basically, existed because they hate Israel. Of course, the foundation of Wahhabism is anti-Israel, right? That's part of it, because Israel is representing the entity that is subjugating the Palestinians. And when you subjugate a group, a minority, a poverty-stricken peoples, they're going to react. They don't have a standing military, so they have these groups like Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad to basically act as its military. They have no choice. What do you expect them to do? Lay down to become slaughter? That's what the Israeli government wants. And, again, all this violence that we're seeing in Israel now wasn't unprovoked. This is coming from months and years of provoked, smaller acts of violence, which is covered up by the media. Another article, I'll give you another one. West Bank, entire Palestinian communities disappeared due to Israeli settler violence. This is August of 2023 by the Norwegian Refugee Council. And according to you nationalists, they're anti-Semitic for doing it, right? For reporting the fucking news. Israeli, let me blow this up just a little bit so you can see it, right? Israeli settler violence and illegal takeover of Palestinian lands have forcibly transferred nearly 500 Palestinians from 7 communities over the past 20 months. 12 families in the Ras Al Tin Bedouin community northeast of Ramallah fled their homes this week. And according to Anna Bozeric, the NRC's county director of Palestine, quote, there are entire Palestinian communities being wiped off the map. A shameful legacy of unrelenting violence, intimidation, and harassment perpetuated by the Israeli settlers, and in some cases encouraged by Israeli authorities. The rapid establishment of settlement outposts and takeover of Palestinian land is choking Palestinian communities, destroying their livelihoods and putting Palestinian lives at risk. Palestinians have no choice but to flee, leaving behind their homes, schools, and jobs, end quote. In the latest incident, a dozen families comprising 89 Palestinians, including 39 children, were forcibly transferred from Ras al-Tin following increased settler harassment and intimidation. Israeli settlers took over the community's grazing lands and established a vineyard next to an Israeli military base. Israeli forces prevented Ras al-Tin residents from accessing their lands. Need I say more? I'm just using the recent reports and articles about why these attacks are happening. Does it give them a right to kill in response? This is not a defense of Hamas. I'm just showing you what precipitated these attacks, because the viewer is not going to get the truth, not from our government, not from our media. Sad to say, in September of this year, September 27th, settlement expansion in occupied Palestinian territories violates international law, must cease, must cease. Many delegates tell the Security Council because they were warning. Keep this up, and a reaction is going to become a prophecy, pointing to ongoing expansion of Israeli settlements, demolition of Palestinian structures, daily violence, and continued inflammatory rhetoric by the government's representatives. A senior United Nations official reiterated to the Security Council the Secretary General's appeal for an end to the occupation and a resolution of the conflict in pursuit of the two-state solution, as members echoed those calls and underlined the need to return to peace negotiations. Tor Wennesland, the United Nations Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, speaking via video conference, reported ongoing settlement activity by Israeli authorities who advanced plans for 6,300 housing units in Area C and approximately 3,580 housing units in East Jerusalem, pointing to the Israeli government's administrative actions that likely expedited settlement expansion in a continuing trend. Many Palestinians, including children, left from their communities, citing violence by settlers and shrinking grazing land. I'll link this report in the description. And of course, the reaction from our government and people who are affiliated with the Democratic and Republican parties, unlike Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, where there's, a tentative universal agreement, when it comes to Israel, there's this cultish, unwavering loyalty. Robert Kennedy Jr., this ignominious, unprovoked, and barbaric attack on Israel must be met with world condemnation on unequivocal support for the Jewish state's right to self-defense. A sellout. I never saw Robert Kennedy condemn the Israeli settlers for their attacks and in a Bedouin community. I never saw Robert Kennedy Jr. saturate his timeline showing you Israeli settler violence that killed a 19-year-old, that killed 10 children last month. Where it is more. Tim Scott from Florida. Hamas terrorist activities on Israel today is an assault on Western civilization. Can you fucking believe that statement? Oh, sakes. The truth is, though, Joe Biden funded these attacks on Israel. One thing about evangelical Christians like Tim Scott, they are the dumbest, most repugnant people. I always said the left are the intelligent criminals. They'll say something and make you think, but morally they're reprehensible. Christian evangelicals are the dumbest criminals on the face of the earth. Republican, like conservatives. evangelicals. They're the dumbest criminals. They'll just say it out loud. Duh, they'll just say it out loud, in their head. But they're saying in their head, they'll say it out loud because they're too stupid not to, because they're reactionary. America's weakness is blood in the water to bad actors, but this is worse than that. We didn't just invite this aggression. We paid for it. Iran is the bigger funder of Hamas. And there you have it. This is the bigger picture I'm going to be talking about soon. Ron DeSantis, according to the biggest Zionist and AIPAC supporter, Israel is now under attack by Iranian-backed Hamas terrorists. Notice, Iranian. Iran has helped fund this war against Israel, and Joe Biden's policies have gone easy on Iran and their coppers. Ladies and gentlemen, now I'll get into the broader geopolitical picture, what this means in the long run. And already I'm hinting at Netanyahu visited the United Nations Security Council weeks ago, where he basically a week ago, where, and this is not the first time, where you had basically him telling the United Nations Security Council that Iran is threatening Israel to nuke them off the map. Remember, he said this about Iraq in 2003. Came to the United States, got a standing ovation by Congress because we're a bunch of sellouts. Basically said that Iraq is producing biological and chemical weapons, and Al-Qaeda is involved. All this was unfounded, wasn't true. Then when that was done, he then went on to Iran. A couple of years ago, you had that, remember that picture of a cartoon bomb? Showed you how close he was, that Iran was close to creating a bomb. But the International Atomic Association has vetted Iran and said they're no closer to building a bomb at all. They don't have the necessary components to build one. And I think that it would be suicide for them not to. Now, we go to the Times of Israel article. This is September 27th of this year. Tehran accuses Netanyahu of threatening to nuke Iran in his UN speech. Hey, how about that, right? So let's read this article. It says Iran has accused Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of issuing a threat in his UN General Assembly speech last week to use nuclear weapons against the Islamic Republic, citing a line in which the Premier's office has clarified he misspoke. Tehran's ambassador in the United Nations, Amir Saeed Avrani, sent a letter of complaint to the UN Secretary General and presidents of the General Assembly and the Security Council expressing strong condemnation of Netanyahu's Friday address. In the Monday letter, which Avrani said was sent to at the order of the Islamic regime, noted, quote, alarming and serious threat by the Prime Minister of the Israeli regime to make use of nuclear weapons against Iran, end quote. In his UN speech Friday, Netanyahu spent significant time on the Iranian nuclear threat and Tehran's support for terrorism and offered oblique criticism of U.S. President Joe Biden's administration and Western countries over the nuclear issue. Netanyahu said, and quote, 8 years ago, the Western powers promised that if Iran violated the nuclear deal, the sanctions would be snapped back. Well, Iran is violating the deal, but the sanctions have not been snapped back. By the way, those sanctions still exist. To stop Iran's nuclear ambitions, the policy must change. Sanctions must be snapped back, end quote. This is what this is all about. This is what this is about. This attack in Israel, so it could be blamed not on the ideology, which is Wahhabi-oriented. It's to be blamed on Iran, Syria, and Lebanon. It's to be blamed on Hezbollah, which the IDF has not forgiven for their defeat in 2006, in which Hezbollah defeated the Israeli IDF, because Israel, they're not very good fighters. That's why they excel in technology. They excel in finance, because they're not fighters at all. They use the United States as the big brother. Their military isn't good. That's why they overexert force, psychological operations on a poverty-stricken Palestinian. It's easy to kick a person when he's down. But imagine if Israel attacked Iran by themselves. They would be destroyed in a week. In a week. because Persians, like Afghans, are awesome fighters, unlike Arabs. There's a lot of blame here. I mean, we have the mullahs in Iran who are basically ghouls, but that's for Iranians to figure out. Hamas and other Salafi-oriented groups funded by the Gulf, Iran, which is backing Hamas because of precipitating attacks against Iran. Imagine Iran basically attacking Israel. It's self-suicide because they damn well know the United States and the coalition partners are getting involved. That's why they don't. And Israel knows this. And that's why they're advocating for a response by the U.S. military. And they've been doing it for the last 30 years, begging the U.S. to intervene, begging the United States to basically, in the last 5 years, especially under the Netanyahu administration, they're basically goading the United States to engage militarily. Now, I've said this years ago, and I told, I think, the Libertarian Institute, my opinions about what the next war would be. The next world war would be Iran. And by default, that would mean Syria and Lebanon, which are basically the allies to Iran. The real war would have been against the United States. Response to 9/11 attacks would have been Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, the countries that gave us Al Qaeda in the first place, that funded Al Qaeda into a terrorist organization in the 1990s. That's not me saying it. That's from the FBI. That you had relief organizations like the Holy Land Foundation, World Islamic Relief Organization, these charities that have Wahhabi roots, funded by the oil boom in the 1980s under Saudi Arabia, which was led by, these groups, Salafi-oriented groups that sympathized with bin Laden and their hatred for the West and their decadent lifestyle. But it was mostly based on politics. And when they say the West, it's meaning Israel as a default position. So Iran is going to be blamed for this, evidently. The media is already blaming them. Our politics already running to Twitter, couldn't wait, like the bunch of prostitutes that they are, sellouts, DeSantis, Scott, Kennedy, sellouts. No one's going to speak against. This is going to be a unilateral agreement because we are led by a bunch of traitors in this country. That's why I don't vote. I don't believe in left and right ideology. There is none. There's only a left and right ideology when it comes to domestic issues. The only reason for this is to keep us divided. That's it. There is no left and right ideology when it comes to the geopolitical agendas or the political agendas or the foreign governments like Israel, like Saudi Arabia. We're giving aid to wars. It's a unilateral agreement across the board. We're led by a very monolithic, very universal, apolitical identity, which is basically based on the roots of class warfare, the oldest war in human history, the poor versus the rich. And there are many facets involved here, whether it be coming from the military corporations, whether it's the fossil fuel industry, whether it's the banking industry, various institutions that give millions of dollars to our congressmen and women. And that's who the congressmen and women cater to, placate to. They don't placate to us. We're the poor. We're the people that are basically used Once in a while, Biden will hold up a baby and kiss its cheek. Same thing for DeSantis. Same thing for Donald Trump. These people do not represent anyone. But we have so many ignorant people in this country, and most of the people are coming from poverty neighborhoods, which breeds extremism, which breeds ignorance. They'll believe anything the TV tells them. They'll believe anything that the news tells them, generally, because they are so blinded by their human ideological constructs, whether it's leftism or rightism or whatever isms from political, religious, racial, sexual, sexism. It's all based upon how that person was brought up. And you coexist with those like-minded people. You don't coexist with people that are like-minded like you. By the way, we're supposed to be a United States. And we're talking about secession. Some libertarians talk about secession in this country like that's going to solve the problem. It's not. The problem is government, plain and simple. These attacks in Israel are not unprovoked. I gave you a short history of thereof and the greater geopolitical ramifications of it. Soon enough, in the next couple of days, what you'll see is that MSNBC and Fox and OANN and all the evangelical right-wing news shows like Newsmax, OANN, they're going to promote Iran war. Slowly but surely, Ukraine will be ignored. My prediction is Zelensky will be assassinated. Or he'll disappear in his villas. The money that we give him. All the weapons that were going in Ukraine, a lot of them are being sold in the black market. Guess where they're going? Middle East. And who are we ignoring right now? The Taliban, the religious Salafi organizations in Afghanistan, and Iraq, because now we'll be concentrating on Iran and the Persians. And the news will tell you that Iran's backing Hamas, that they're the greatest exporter of terrorism. They're already saying it. Don't believe it for a second. Meanwhile, super powerhouse like Saudi Arabia are going to rebuild. They already are. They can't reform the whole country. Half of it is based on the Wahhabi principle. And by extension, the Gulf. And soon enough, in 10 years' time, all these organizations like Al-Qaeda are in the Arabian Peninsula, the Taliban in Afghanistan, which are housing and governing, allowing Al-Qaeda to govern. The Taliban's doing this. Bill Biggio, one of the best in the world when it comes to counterterrorism investigative reporting, please follow him on Twitter, is one of the very few people that are reporting on this. That Al-Qaeda is in the Taliban government. Because what's going to happen is this. We don't defeat enemies. We destroy them to the point where they're almost non-existent, but we leave them with a heartbeat. It's like I said about Hamas and how they started. Starts with a heartbeat. And then we start supplying the blood, the bones, the muscle, the tissue, the brains. And then they become a body. Then they become thought. They become and they reproduce. That's all. That's what we do. The government. The intelligence services who act as an arm. Military industrial complex who acts as the other arm. We don't defeat enemies. We destroy them. In the next 10 years, when they rebuild, we go back to it. Because that's exactly what's going to happen. When this revisitation of the Cold War ends, and it will end, we'll leave those separatist groups barely alive. Well, we go back to the Salafi or Wahhabi-oriented groups and commit war with them. Maybe 10, 12 years down the road, we'll have another 9/11. Because like George Santayana once said, those who are doomed to forget the past are doomed to repeat it. And as Orwell once wrote in 1984, war was never meant to be won. It was meant to be continuous. Until we, the people, say enough. Now we're seeing protests in Yemen, protests in Iran, condemning these attacks, condemning the response by the Israeli military. But they'll be shouted down by the legacy media in this country. And of course, our congressmen and women will ignore them and call them traitors. Facilitating violence, precipitating violence. That's what's going to happen next. And we need as a people to stand united, get rid of these labels, left and right. I mean, God's sakes, we all are a human community, but we're so inherently brainwashed by ideological differences that we're not looking at the bigger picture, that we're a community of shared consciousness. That's what we are. We are the shared essence of creation. Whatever you want to think, it's God or gods or some spiritual enlightenment or a life form that's far more advanced. But the thing is that you have forgot where you came from and forgot who you are. And let's not forget who we are. Because if we do that, we're going to cease to exist. All right. Any more updates? I'm going to, of course, report it without bias and without prejudice, because that's how we're going to build a united, strong movement, a movement based on information when we can react and act on it. See you later in the next video. Take care.